Welcome back to the CBAN Showcase 2020. If you're just now joining us, this is the inaugural event by the Communications Business Automation Network, where the ecosystem of ICT service providers and technology developers work together to automate the business of telecommunications to unlock the future of connectivity. Our next session is entitled Automating Settlement for Data on Demand. Data on demand is one of the use cases for CBAN where we cooperate with other industry bodies such as the MEF to give you a motivation from the perspective of a service provider who is in the forefront of offering on-demand services and whose team also leads efforts to define interoperability for on-demand services in the industry. I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker. Please join me in welcoming Mirko Voltolini, Global Head of Network On Demand at Colt. Mirko is responsible for leading the effort to architect and develop the Colt network and product portfolio to deliver an online digital customer experience where customers order, design, and manage their network on demand. Before I hand over to Mirko, I would like to highlight a couple of items. Please feel free to ask questions during the session. You can ask a question using the Q&A function on the button on the bottom of the Zoom window. We will collect questions throughout the presentation and address them at the end. And please feel free, in fact, we encourage you to post extensively about this event. Use the hashtag #CBANShowcase. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Mirko. Mirko, please go ahead.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. So we'll talk about the Colt use case. If you can go to the next slide, please, Joe. But let me start with some background on what's happening within the telecom industry and within the network. There is a significant digital transformation ongoing in the industry that is driven primarily by the adoption of technology, as it often happens in the digital transformation space. And in particular, I'm looking at software-defined networking and network function virtualization. These technologies have started to be introduced in the network a few years ago. They're now becoming mainstream. The main advantage of using them as opposed to traditional network technologies is that they enable granular control of the underlying network capabilities and service capabilities, disaggregating the software from the hardware, so separating the physical component from the actual service components. And with that, you can enable on-demand control on the network. So this is a major opportunity for automation. Many carriers have taken this opportunity, and in particular, they've started to, they started usually with internal automation, so automation for the benefit of driving internal efficiencies. If you can move to the next one, please. But we at Colt took the opportunity a few years ago to actually expand the opportunity not just to internal automation, but also to exposing services externally. We built, I mean, it's now probably over 4 years that we have been working on this platform. We built a network on demand capability that allows us to expose our services to customers. We serve enterprises and other carriers, so wholesale providers. Leveraging these technologies, SDN and NFV in particular, the service enable carriers and enterprise to consume connectivity data services, in particular for the moment, in a automated on-demand way through the possibility of quoting, ordering, activating, and then managing in live their services. This covers multiple different services. Ethernet, that's what we started with, and then expanded to cloud access, so adding cloud determination, and then internet access, so layer 3 services. It's a digital consumption model through portal or API, so we actually give customers self-control of the underlying services. They can control when they want to activate the service, and they can also change the topologies and characteristics of the service in a real-time fashion. And one of the other major changes that we made is enabling a different commercial model, as opposed to the traditional fixed contractual term model where you buy services with standard terms, typically 12 months, monthly recurring charge, and one-off installation charge. We changed the model, enabling customers also to consume services in a flexible manner, something close to a pay-as-you-go model where customers can activate a service, increase the bandwidth without change the charges associated with the service, shut down the service whenever they want, not only at the 12 months termination of the contract, and basically enabling an on-demand experience with the service, which mirrors very much what's happening in the voice space, where you have voice calls consuming a certain amount of traffic and then finishing off at the end of the call. So a similar type of model. Next slide, please. What's the main manifestation of this automation, especially looking at the carrier-to-carrier contest? APIs. We built an API. It's an API-first platform. We built in-house this capability, leveraging, again, SDN and NFV technologies. We allow customers, and in this example here, I'm showing the activity that Colt and TNT led in the market using the MEF lifecycle orchestration API to enable this real-time user experience, where in seconds we enable AT&T to check an address, validate if a service is available through serviceability checks, obtain a quote, and then there is a manual decision point that they decide to build into the process, and then place an order. That order can be fulfilled automatically if capacity is available that is applicable to certain type of locations in our network, data centers in particular, and if pre-existing capacity has been deployed also in retail buildings, in enterprise buildings, that's also applicable. So we actually shorten the whole process of fulfillment from weeks, typically many weeks. There's typical delivery time for a carrier to a few minutes. So quite a significant improvement in the overall user experience, but that is today focused on fulfillment. So the part that starts from what we also call quote to cash, from where the customer starts to engage to validate service availability up to the point of ordering the service. MEF plans to expand the coverage of the LSO API in the short term to also the assurance side, so the in-life aspect like ticketing, some elements of the post-delivery phase. However, today the services, the automation of the API is limited to the fulfillment part. If you move to the next slide, please, Joe. So there are a number of steps that happens in particular in front and at the end of the process I just described that today aren't automated. As I said, this LSO API is called Sonata, is a business API, allows buyer and seller to perform business operations. So all these activities I described, quoting, ordering, and activation. The rest of the relationships, often called bilaterals between buyers and seller, are mostly manual. Here I'm talking about activities like onboarding, so the initial contract negotiation, agreeing the terms of the contract and the SLAs, and the activities happen at the end of a business transaction. So in particular things like billing, settlement, reconciliation. So all the more commercial, financial related activities. So there is a significant opportunity for extending the automation described to the domain of again onboarding. So the initial part, managing SLAs, the billing, the more commercial activities. What I would say is that these activities they require a level of trust between the customers, the two parties, which is higher than what is typically applicable to the standard business operations. Agreeing on charges and billing and settlement requires a level of details, a level of control, and a level of trust to enable faster onboarding, to enable reducing disputes between carriers, and to remove all the steps that today are performed manually, and ultimately enable faster payment. So here is where blockchain, digital electronic technology can play a role. That's our use case. We've been in this market for a number of years with a very mature service. We're now looking into how can we expand the automation beyond the pure fulfillment phase. So let me hand over back to Joe for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Mirko, for a very interesting and provocative presentation, showing us a lot of possibilities. As you say, there is significant opportunity for automation and collaboration here. And I'd like to shift gears and bring in some other members of the CBAN community who are actually working on realizing that promise that Mirko was talking about. R3 has been engaged with CBAN from the very beginning of our journey. And I'd like to introduce Thomas Spencer, who is Director and Telco Lead at R3. Thomas will tell you a bit about R3's data on demand efforts, and he'll introduce our colleagues Rahini and Arka from Infosys, who will be helping him demonstrate some of their data on demand work. So with that, Thomas, please take it away.
Thanks very much, Joe. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody today. As Joe kindly said, my name is Thomas Spencer. I'm the telecoms lead here at R3, and we're a technology partner of the CBAN and have been since early last year. So I thought before we go into specific work that's being done, it's probably worth recapping where exactly we have got to as collectively as the CBAN partners and members with the data on demand journey, and where we all hope to go. And I think it's relevant just to kind of reflect that the amount of progress that we've made on this use case over the last year to 2 years really has been remarkable. The CBAN has enabled us all to collectively really dive deep into this use case to understand it. And obviously the output of that with some fantastic leadership from the CBAN and members has been the writing of the reference architecture. I think it's also a fantastic example of the type of inter-associational cross-industry collaboration that Louisa spoke about in her opening remarks today, where we have seen and are seeing the CBAN and MEF start to collaborate as well, with the reference architecture that was originally written within the CBAN, initiate the supply chain and billing incubation group within the MEF, and now that is progressing into a MEF project to establish the industry standards for this use case. So what we have there is the kind of governance and really arena for collaboration be able to be has been set up now by the CBAN, and the standards are getting are being written within the MEF and are getting a huge amount of support from the MEF association and the industry there. So as the vendor community within the CBAN and the member community, I think now the challenge for us to go forward is to dive deep into these POCs, and to do so that we can collaboratively iterate and innovate in a very scalable and efficient way, and obviously provide these activities provide feedback into the standards and the reference architectures, which will continue to evolve, but also to do something that Mark I think very well articulated in his opening statements as well, is start to understand the business case. Because if we are going to reach the end goal that we all strive for, which is a vibrant ecosystem of interoperable data on demand applications, then we need to understand what business value is being created. These solutions we're all designing and working on, we hope will be able to really expand the market for ICT service providers, to be able to deliver new automated on-demand services to end customers. And so with that, at R3, we for those of you who are not familiar with R3, we developed the Corda platform, and we work with a large number of partners who develop different solutions on top of Corda. And we've been particularly excited over the last year or so to be working very closely with Infosys as one of our partners, who collectively we've started to build out a data on demand solution. And so with that, I'm very pleased to hand over to Rohini and Arka, who are going to be taking through that. Maybe you guys like to kick off with introducing yourselves.
Thank you, Thomas. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be participating in this showcase here today. So I'm Rohini. I drive blockchain practice at Infosys, and my colleague Arka, who is a principal consultant. We will be putting forth our point of view on data on demand. As Thomas mentioned, we've been working with R3 and now look forward to starting a journey with CBAN in contributing towards the initiative in setting up an ecosystem that can benefit all the carrier members of CBAN. So just to briefly introduce, if you could move to the next slide, please. Yeah, the next one. Thank you. So Infosys goes way back to about 2015 in distributed ledger technologies. We have a lot of history there. We were amongst the earliest service providers to sponsor blockchain ecosystems, some of which are now live networks in the financial services domain. As a next generation digital services company, we continue to make strategic investments in key catalysts to drive and accelerate blockchain adoption. These are, of course, driven both by industry verticals and technologies. And from a vertical perspective, telecom goes right at the top, where there's a tremendous focus at Infosys towards creating an ecosystem and contributing towards a blockchain-based ecosystem. Now, in today's session, we will present a brief point of view and demo for one of the workflows implemented in blockchain as telecom accelerators. So before we proceed, I'd like to put forth our perspective on why blockchain in telecom. So did you know that subscriber and revenue growth rate trends have declined by about 75% over the last decade globally, whereas mobile data has witnessed nearly quadruple growth over a span of 12 months alone? This points us to a conclusion that even though there is greater demand for data, this is not contributing to the overall revenue, much less the margin growth for CSPs. And this is, of course, a disturbing trend, which I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. Now, the key contributors here are likely that competitive pricing has been eroding margins, with ARPU declining by about 0.8% year on year, for instance, in 2018. Then there is revenue leakage due to fraud. And globally, telecom fraud was estimated to have cost about $28 billion USD in 2019. We will cover this separately in another forum. And a very severe issue afflicting the industry is inter-carrier settlement, or if I may say, the lack of it. The life cycle is complex and protracted. From dispute identification to resolution, it is long drawn out, adding to tremendous cost overheads for all parties involved. Now, all of these challenges offer a strong business case for a decentralized ledger as a single source of truth in a multi-party scenario. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the telecom business landscape is understood to comprise of the four segments that you see on the slide: BSS, OSS, enterprise functions, and network. Of course, each of the carriers may have slightly different variations, but this is just as our point of view and our perspective based on our experiences. So we would like to focus today on interconnect, which contributes about 30 to 40% of the overall business of telco. This is based on reports in the public domain. It is also one of the major reasons contributing to the declining margins. Now, in the existing scenario, Interconnect partners share invoices based on the agreed billing cycles. These invoices are then reconciled with the billing system records of each carrier. And in case of any discrepancy, the next step is to reconcile the CDRs to verify any cross charges, volume mismatches, or fraudulent transactions if there are. Now, the end-to-end verification process turns out to be costly, cumbersome, inefficient, and tremendously prone to errors. One could claim that these overheads are not limited to interconnect, but plague the entire wholesale domain. The root of the problem lies in the fact that each party maintains its records in a silo with almost no transparency. Dispute settlement includes serious financial issues due to excessive settlement overheads, even exposure to fraud in remote jurisdictions, which can be a nightmare to resolve, and blocked or lost revenue because of unpaid bills. For all these reasons and more, we believe that a blockchain-based solution can dramatically streamline interconnect, cross-charging and billing, solve data delays, and save time for every operator because it will ensure real-time data dissemination. We have visualized several solutions to this effect and have implemented them as well. My colleague Arka will walk you through one such sample solution for agreement and billing. Over to you, Arka, and if we can move to the next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Rohini, and kindly let me know, the team, if you can hear me.
Yes, Arka, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to start with a simplified example of an interconnect or partner billing, which will serve as a proxy for our as-is state. It will give you a sense of how we started thinking about data on demand, our initial assessment, and it will help us have this boundary condition. The diagram that you have on the screen, you can see an existing business agreement between two partners. The agreement with parameters such as tariff details, the applicable rates, the tax regime specifications, discounts, etc. Even the contract period. The second aspect to this diagram is this the billing part, which involves the CDR generation, rating, transfer of invoices, and of course the reconciliation invoice generation and stuff like that. So the process works, but there are certain issues which I want to highlight. One is your the admin overhead that deals with all the reconciliation overheads that you have, the life cycle management overheads, which in turn leads you to a protracted or a time to activation which is longer, due to this management overhead. And then with this in turn leads you to the impact on your revenue and cash flow. So what if we could foster a multilateral collaboration that reduces this management overhead? And of course, the underlying technical debt which causes this management overhead through technology intervention, or more specifically, the DLT-led intervention. So if we had that, we can then be able to manage contracts or agreements more efficiently, execute nuanced contracts that are time-bound and transient in nature. As a consequence, we could reduce the admin overheads, reduce time to activation of services, improve cash flow, and perhaps even increase revenue with service portfolio extension. So this brings us to the our idea of data on demand. If we move to the next slide, please. So we are exploring a DLT-based platform that supports multilateral digital agreements that forms the genesis of billing and settlement. The platform is, of course, extensible to support all kinds of on-demand services, be it video conference, e-line, and in our case, it will be in BIOT, which we will shortly see in our demo. It is easy to manage, and it is bilateral by design. It is important because at any point in time, the contract terms and parameters are visible to all partners, and they can negotiate the terms before accepting or rejecting it. So we will typically start with the contract creation. If you follow the screen on the steps 1, 2, and 3, they're typically bucketed into contract creation, which is where we are defining parameters, negotiating the parameters, and accepting or rejecting the parameters. Once the agreement is executed, the parameters become digitally indelible. And that forms the basis of all your billing and invoicing. It is also auditable and can be monitored for SLA performance. Since the contract terms are DLT native, you can just pick up usage records and generate the invoice instantly, based on the tariffs, tax codes, discounts, etc. The invoice is immediately available for verification with the counterparty and whoever party wants to verify it. Such a mechanism brings several benefits. Some of them I'll just mention. It reduces, of course, the overhead, reconciliation, dispute, life cycle management, and which also in turn reduces your admin cost. In addition to that, because of the above benefits, it allows you to manage more nuanced time-bound contracts, which the operator otherwise wouldn't have been able to support, and as a consequence, lose potential revenue opportunities. So before we go into the demo, I'd like to summarize the key value proposition. If you go to the next slide. So the concept demo, before we come to it, so the value proposition is this. It is a multilateral ledger that promotes transparency, collaboration, and trust. This allows the operators reduce cost, manage cash flow, and potentially capture new revenue streams. And it has extended values. Extended values, I just mentioned 3 of them: reputation management, real-time inventory visibility, and automated SLA enforcement. These are just to mention some of them. So if we go to the next slide, before I cover the demo, I'd like to go on with this, is that during the demo, I'll cover 2 parties, CSP A and CSP B, negotiating a NB-IoT agreement and completing the workflow with the invoice generation. So we will see 1, a dashboard with SLAs and contract positions. 2, we will create a contract. 3, we will negotiate the terms of the contract. And finally, we will complete the workflow by generating an invoice based on the contract parameter. With this, I'll switch my screen and go on to the demo. I'll share my screen. Let me know if you can see. Has it come up?
Yes, Arthur.
Yes.
Thank you. So I am logging in as CSP A. So let me log in. So I can immediately see all my contracts at once, what state they're in, approved or rejected status, and which one needs attention. They are categorized by, service types, for example, NB-IoT, line, etc. Categorized by geographies, by vendors, and you can also see the composite SLA by contract. So this one is particularly the example which we will be taking is the NB-IoT one. So I will now create an agreement for NB-IoT. I am selecting a template which will pre-fill some of the parameters. So now with all the contract is customized, I'm going to fill up all the details. I'm going to put the country code for tax details. I'm going to put an agreement name. I'm going to put the contract period. Then I'll specify if discounts are applicable or not. And finally, I'll put the applicable tiers. Now these tiers, I just want to mention that these are all configurable parameters. And we can always customize those fields and terms. And per tier, what we are going to have is we can also define SLAs. In this case, we'll just specify an SLA of above 99% and with associated penalty clause. And we can see we can add multiple other tiers as well. And similarly, we can customize those tiers, customize the parameters, and define SLAs for each of those tiers as well. And I'm going to submit the agreement and say, yes, So as soon as I submit, I'm back to the screen which lists all the agreements which are available to me. And what we see, the status as sent for approval, and it is now gone to CSP B, which is now required to approve or reject or negotiate the contract terms. So I'm logging in as party B. So I'm going to click the notification that I have. It is asking me to take some action. Once I click that, I'm brought to the same agreement. And now I have the option to approve, reject, or propose change. If I propose change, some of the fields becomes editable. So I can, for example, change the rate applicable to me, which I'm proposing is the right rate for me. In this case, I will just cancel and approve it for the sake of this demo. And once I approve, this particular status of the agreement becomes approved. And now this particular agreement is executed. And it is now functional between these two parties, party A and party B. With this, I'll be able to now create an invoice, which I'm going to do now. Create an invoice. So now you see this invoice is getting created for that particular agreement. I'm choosing a usage record. And once the usage record is created, you have the usage data from the usage record, which I uploaded, and the tariff details and the discount details, everything is coming from the agreement. So now with this, I'm able to generate or at least propose a bill. In this case, what I'm going to do is, so just to give you a little bit of nuance about this invoice, that in this case, I'm able to specify the number of devices which were used. It's coming from the usage, the overage rates, and the kind of discounts which is applicable, or the penalties terms are coming from the agreement, and they're just multiplying those values and coming up with the applicable amount. So if I'm agreeing to that, I can submit it. And again, since it is the bilateral platform, immediately what we see is that the status change waiting for approval goes to CSPA. Now the CSPA has a chance to take action on it. It can again either accept, reject, or propose changes. In this case, I will just accept the changes, and I can immediately see that the invoice is in approved status. That is, this invoice is agreed, that the amount of $655 is agreed upon by both the parties, CSPs A and CSP B, which in turn will be able will trigger the settlement process, whether you want to do net settlement or net plus 30, but whatever you do, the settlement process will be much faster now. And with this, I will take a pause and unshare my screen and open it for a Q&A. Thank you so much for having me here.
Great. Thank you, Arka. And I'll give a second for the screen share to come back. But while we do that, we can move the conversation on, because that really concludes the demo portion. Thomas, do you have any summing up you would want to say about that before we move to some of the Q&A?
Well, just around that, I think it's, first of all, thank you very much, Rohini and Arka, for presenting that. It's something that Infosys have been, and us here, our three have been working for some time together. It's, and you know, I hope we've certainly shown the tip of the iceberg of what is possible, and we're really excited to continue to collaborate further with CBAN members to further build this out and test it. So if anybody's interested, please feel free to get in touch through any means.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. So we have had a couple of interesting questions. We've had several questions come in, and a couple of them I think we might want to talk about on Member Day. Some of the ones about fraud and things like that are very interesting, but we have a session on that that's coming up later. In fact, you'll see some of our same partners here. You'll see Thomas and Rohini and Arka there too. So I'm going to park those, but there was one that came in early on that I would like to mention and have our panelists reflect on. Other telco use cases, and the questioner mentioned SLA and penalty management, et cetera, and really everything that fits into the whole end-to-end relationship. But I wanted to say that one of the things that we worked on in the CBAN earlier this year were mechanisms for SLA management, for reputation as a citizen of the network. And there was a very engaged community there. And I'd recommend that if that's of interest to you, join and come join the working groups, because those are topics that are being discussed actively at CBAN right now. And Thomas, I know that R3 did some work around some of these issues in a POC at MEF 19 about a year ago now. Maybe you'd like to tell us a little about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe. So on the reputation management and automated SLA enforcement, for anybody who is watching this and interested about the CBAN, I'd definitely reiterate Joe's comments there. It's something that the CBAN working groups have been defining and working on intensely over the last year. So please join and contribute to those. At MEF last year, R3 collaborated with PCCW Global and another firm, DC Connect, to showcase how reputation scores could be generated and shared securely over a blockchain network. This was particularly exciting because thinking about reputation management, one of the great challenges with it is using traditional centralized architecture. You have to rely on some kind of rating agency or centralized entity. If you start to implement this logic and these rules in a decentralized way using blockchain, you no longer need to have that central kind of God view or rating agency, and you can now start to have much more kind of scalable ways of being able to generate reputation scores and use those to enforce SLA or indeed, I guess, to where SLAs have been missed, to down score a reputation. And that has really, one of the exciting things when we presented this was the industry feedback that this could have really, really valuable consequences for the industry to be able to provide, organizations as commercial entities new data points with which to make commercial decisions by being able to see a reputation score and be able to enforce SLA contracts in an automated way. Really could create quite a lot of value within the industry. So that was great to see.
Thank you, Thomas. And I would say also that this is a very good time, if you have thoughts and opinions about this, to engage in the CBAN, because the CBAN is really the place where service providers and carriers, as Mirko is representing, come together with technology partners like Thomas and Rahini and Arka representing, to actually take some of the abstract ideas and make them concrete, but to make them concrete in a way that meets the needs of the service provider community. So it's a great conversation. And if you're interested in that, I would welcome you to come and join us. Mirko, you, as somebody who is overseeing the entire end-to-end on-demand process, do you have any thoughts about any of what we just spoke about that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, our comment on SLAs, managing SLAs and penalties through blockchain, through DLT, there is a very strong use case for that, especially in the carrier-to-carrier world, as those activities, as I described earlier in the presentation, are all performed manually. There is a significant overhead, they're very onerous, and as a result of that, they're not performed very well. So there is a very strong use case to implement that. It will take away a burden in the carrier-to-carrier engagement. A specific comment on reputation, I think that, again, technically is a very possible capability to implement. Today, if you look at the world in general, this is a well-accepted practice in the consumer world, where, or maybe inevitable practice in the consumer world, where traders are judged on their performance automatically by consumers, whether they like it or not. It will require in the telecom world a level of acceptance of this level of transparency, which I think today doesn't exist. Obviously, there will be more virtuous carriers that will be willing to do that, and some others will not be willing to do that. I think we base our strategy also on quality of service, so I think Colt will be a proponent of that. But I think, again, we need a step change for that mechanism to be accepted in the industry.
Thank you, Mirko. And one other quick thing that we can get to, I think, if we have just about enough time. There was another question about the pros and cons of managing reconciliation on chain. And all of the people on this panel can tell you that we have spent hours and hours looking at ways to optimize that process and being clever about that process, and also in cooperating with the MEF. Where they are taking what they're calling a smart bilateral approach to that. So also, if that's of interest to you, come join the CBAN, because those are the kinds of issues that we're dealing with and looking at. And Rohini, I think you also had some specific thoughts on that. We have just a couple minutes, but if you want to take a few seconds and give an overview of that, that might generate some interest, and people can contact you later for details.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. So yes, commissions in reconciliation is a very strong candidate for blockchain. In fact, we've implemented it for one of our clients, and this is soon getting into production. So it makes a strong use case because there is, if I may articulate the problem statement, there is poor data visibility, and leading to reconciliation overheads. There are high manual reconciliation volumes, and of course, a greater processing cycle time. There is no traceability or poor compliance of contract rules. So basically, given that data is fragmented, it leads to several challenges. So what we did was we reimagined the application landscape with blockchain at its core that would allow this carrier and its partners to collaborate on the business process with complete trust. And the sale and financial information would be maintained and shared through the ledger and facilitate transparency. So basically, the initial focus in the initial iteration was auto calculation of commissions, auto reconciliation to increase data quality, and also importantly, smart contracts to flag outliers for manual checks. So I think you can start at the core and then progressively increase the scope. But this is already acknowledged, and we're seeing movement. In fact, for the implementation that we did, one of the handset manufacturers, which is a partner of this particular carrier, was engaged upfront in the requirements definition phase. So the pilot is being done with them.
Wonderful.
So,
thank you, Rohini. The clock is against us. We have a hard stop. So, but please, everybody, there was a question here about why don't we have 200 members yet? Well, with this kind of conversation, maybe we'll get them by the end of this showcase. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for the demonstration, for the provocative thoughts. And to the audience, I would like to remind you that we have another showcase session starting at the top of the hour, where a couple of more technology providers will be telling you what they're doing at CBAN. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience. And please keep coming back.
Thank you.